Hi everyone, welcome back to GCSE English. We are on week 19. I hope you're all okay. Last week we were looking at question 5 and question 6 on paper 2, the last two questions on that paper, and the two questions where you need to look at both documents. So well done if you completed that work. If you haven't, make sure you turn that in before you start on this one today, as this is just serving as a recap for those two questions. So as normal, if you're due in college this week, just go on the Google Meet, just so your tutors know that you're here and that you know what you're doing. If you're watching this and it's Tuesday, there is no Google Meet this week due to a maths and English training day. So if you need any help with anything, if you want to just put a message on the classroom or if you can email us, we'll try our best to get in touch and help you. Okay, so let's get started then. Anybody know what this is a picture of? It is a very famous prison. If you do, put some answers in the chat, mate. I'll give you a clue. It's not Tracy Island from Thunderbirds, although it does look a little bit like that. No swimming pool where Thunderbird 1's going to come out of, I'm afraid. We're going to be recapping question 5 and question 6 today, as I've said. So that will require us to be using our summarising skills, and we're going to be summarising the attitudes of two different writers across two different texts. We're then, for question 6, going to be comparing these attitudes and perspectives across those two texts. And as always, we need to make sure that we find quotes and we embed them into our responses to support every idea that we say. Remember, no quotes, no marks. All right, so if you haven't figured it out yet, our theme is prison today, in particular children in prison. And we're going to read two different texts. The first one we're going to read was written by Oscar Wilde, who's a really famous playwright, or he was in the 19th century. And he actually was sent to prison in Reading for being a homosexual. Pretty brutal in the 19th century. If you were publicly gay, you could get sent to prison. Awful. So if you go to Google Classroom, I'm pretty sure you know how to do this by now. You click on classwork, and then you need to find week 19, where there will be this video that you're watching, and there'll also be, oh, I've gotten too far, there'll be some documents. So the first document that we're after is Children in Prison by Oscar Wilde. Open that one up, it should look like this. Remember, your view in Classroom looks slightly different to mine, so yours might not be laid out like this. You need to find the turn it in button where your assignment is, and that's where your documents will be. You might only be able to see the YouTube video at the moment. Okay, so you might have to click on open assignment or view assignment or something like that to see the documents, but there will be 3 of them. The first one we want is Children in Prison by Oscar Wilde. So we're going to read this together. So make sure you've got it open. If you want to pause the video for a couple of seconds just so you get that open, and then we'll read it through. So it tells you at the top there, it's an extract from a letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to the Daily Chronicle newspaper after he was released from prison in Reading in 1897. So he served 2 years in that prison. And in the 19th century, adults were in prison with children. And well, you'll be able to see what you think he thought it was like from this extract. The cruelty that is practiced by day and night on children in English prisons is unbelievable, except to those who have witnessed it and are aware of the brutality of the system. The present treatment of children is terrible, primarily from people not understanding the peculiar psychology of a child's nature. The child being taken away from its parents by people whom it has never seen and of whom it knows nothing, and finding itself in a lonely and unfamiliar cell, waited on by strange faces and ordered about and punished by representatives of a system that it cannot understand, becomes an immediate prey to the first and most prominent emotion produced by modern prison, the emotion of terror. The terror of a child in prison is quite limitless. I remember once in Reading, as I was going out to exercise, seeing in the dimly lit cell right opposite my own a small boy. The child's face was like a white wedge of sheer terror. and there was in his eyes the terror of a hunted animal. The next morning I heard him at breakfast time crying and calling to be let out. His cry was for his parents. From time to time I could hear the deep voice of the warder on duty telling him to keep quiet. Yet he was not even convicted of whatever little offence he had been charged with. He was simply on remand. Justices and magistrates, an entirely ignorant class as a rule, often remand children for a week and then perhaps remit whatever sentence they are entitled to pass. To the little child, whether he is in prison or on remand or after conviction, in the eyes of humanity, it should be a horrible thing for him to be there at all. Every child is confined to its cell for 23 hours of the 24. This is the appalling thing. To shut up a child who is preyed upon by terror and has been crying all day long and perhaps half of the night in a lonely, dimly lit cell for 23 hours of the 24 is an example of the cruelty of stupidity. If an individual, parent or guardian did this to a child, he would be severely punished. A child is utterly contaminated by prison life, but the contaminating influence is not that of the prisoners, it is that of the whole prison system, of the governor, the chaplain, the warders, the lonely cell, the isolation, the revolting food, and the rules of the prison commissioners. The only really humanising influence in prison is the influence of the prisoners. Their cheerfulness under terrible circumstances, their sympathy for each other, their humility, their gentleness and their pleasant smiles of greeting whenever they meet each other. It is not the prisoners who need reformation, it is the prisons. Of course, no child under 14 years of age should be sent to prison at all. It is an absurdity of absolute tragic results. If, however, they are to be sent to prison, during the daytime they should be in a workshop or schoolroom with a warder. At night, they should sleep in a dormitory with a night warder to look after them. They should be allowed exercise for at least 3 hours a day. The dark, badly ventilated, ill-smelling prison cells are dreadful for a child, dreadful indeed for anyone. One is also always breathing bad air in prison. The food given to children should consist of tea and bread and butter and soup. A resolution of the House of Commons could settle the treatment of children in half an hour. I hope you will use your influence to have this done. The way that children are treated at present is really an outrage on humanity and common sense. It comes from stupidity. Okay, so that is our 19th century text that we're going to be using today, our first text. Like we said earlier, it's a letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to a newspaper. So I'm not going to tell you what Oscar Wilde thought, because it's the first task that I want you to do. I'm not going to tell you everything. I want you to be able to figure out this text on your own, although I think there are quite a lot of strong indicators on how he did feel. Now, firstly, hopefully you remember how to summarise from last week. So we were talking about taking something rather large and condensing it down into something smaller, picking out the main ideas from something that's really big and making it smaller. So we said, when we summarise, particularly for question 5, we need to find the main ideas and then we need to write them in our own words. Remember back to when we were doing the plot summaries for creative writing, instead of telling me every single detail of a whole film plot, you summarise them into a couple of sentences. Okay, so that taking the big and making it a bit smaller. So, can you summarise? I'm only asking for 2 things today. 2 ways in which Oscar Wilde says that children are treated in prison. So he talks a lot about their treatment. Can you just summarise 2 of the things that he says? Now, I want you to write your answers on this document here that says week 19, your answers. I'll just open that up. And I've already written on there 2 ways Wilde says children are treated in prison. So you just need to put your first answer there, your second answer there. Remember, these can just be 1-word answers. They don't have to be full sentences. We're just preparing you for question 5 here. So it's just to show that you've understood what you've just read. So can you just bullet point for me 2 ways in which Oscar Wilde says that children are treated in prison? So you might just want to pause the video now, a couple of minutes, while you write that down. Okay, nice one. So we're going to move on to our next text. I've put two things there that I picked out: punished and ordered about, confined to cells for most of the day. There were lots of other things you could have said. Maybe you got things that were different to me. Maybe you got things that were similar. Our next text is written by a man named Mark Johnson, and again, it's about the issues surrounding children in prison. Now, this is our 21st century text, so you can see this one's a lot more recent, 2008. Now, Mark Johnson is the founder of a charity. The charity is called Use a Voice, and it works with children in prisons and in the community to try and give them a better life and to try and rehabilitate them. So if you go back to Google Classroom, you'll be able to see the text that says Children in Prison, Mark Johnson. So you just need to open that one up. It looks like this. And again, we'll read this one together. You can see from its format here that this one has been published in a newspaper. We've got a headline, we've got the author, and it tells us the date there that was published. And you've also got those social media buttons, so you can see that it's an online article that could be shared. Okay, so if you want to pause the video just for a couple of seconds while you open that up. So the headline is Children in Prison Aren't Coping, but Nobody Seems to Care, by Mark Johnson. Children's jails are places we all wish didn't exist. In this country, we lock children up at 10, the minimum legal age for criminal responsibility. In secure children's homes, young offender institutions, and secure training centres, children are detained for committing crime, but also for their own protection from abuse. This means some are detained for having done nothing wrong. They can be locked up for any amount of time, including for the majority of their childhood. Recently, Use a Voice, the organisation I founded, gave some of them an opportunity to tell the world about their lives. What they told us made me angry and fearful for their futures. These vulnerable children are seriously stressed. 85% said they had taken drugs, of whom a large proportion told us this was to cope and to alleviate stress, grief, and anger. For all the stories of good practice, there were many, many more of torturous loneliness, abuse from staff and other inmates, and a lack of stimulating or helpful activities for them to engage in. These children don't believe adults will help them. 3/4 said they didn't trust any professional involved in their so-called care. Can't go anywhere for help because all they will do is write stuff down and use it against you, one child told us. Little wonder that so many of these young people reported using drugs to deal with complex mental health issues such as grief, trauma, and long-term stress. Some mentioned drinking to cope and being hospitalized numerous times. Stressed, no one to trust, and resorting to drugs to cope is a ticking time bomb, and it's not just the trauma of what happened to them before they were locked up. Nearly all the kids I met seemed to be having a stress response to their situation, locked up for weeks, months, and years, with limited access to their families, friends, and possessions. But these vulnerable children, and we should all be uncomfortable about incarcerating them. It is also a huge waste of money. It typically costs £200,000 a year to lock up one child, with around half of young offenders ending up in adult jails. This system is failing to rehabilitate children who commit crimes. We keep doing the same old thing, punish, lock up, but then never address the underlying causes that lead to stress, chaos, and chemical reliance. The young people themselves know it is a scandal. They want future generations to have the early intervention that they didn't have, including access to supportive staff who understand, listen, are approachable, who respect them, and who they feel they can trust. But no one seems to care that these vulnerable children are not coping with being locked up, let alone do anything about it. If we don't start jailing fewer children and making life better for those who are incarcerated, we cannot have much hope of ending the negative cycle of disadvantage, abuse, neglect, drug taking, and offending. The government needs to understand the links between trauma and child offending and provide properly funded support services. All right, so that is our second text, our 21st century text that we are going to be using today alongside Oscar Wilde's. Again, I'm not going to tell you what I think of that text. I'm going to let you think about it. So read it as many times as you need to, or listen to me read it as many times as you need to. And then I want you to summarize in 2 bullet points, please, 2 ways you think Johnson says children are treated in prison. So if you go back to your answer sheet, week 19, you should have already filled in this one, Oscar Wilde. Can you now do the exact same thing for the second one, so the Johnson's text? Okay. So 2 ways Johnson says children are treated in prison. So you might just want to pause this video for a minute or 2 while you do that. Okay, like last time, I wrote down a couple of ideas. So I said they have limited access to their friends, family and possessions, and also they receive abuse from staff and other inmates. He did talk about quite a few ways that they were treated. They're just 2 of the ones that I picked out. Maybe you got something different to me. Maybe you got something similar. What I want you to do though is just pause the video for a couple of minutes and compare your bullet points now. Are any similar in the 19th century prison to the prisons of today? Or is anything different? Have a look. This is going to help you in the next question. Okay, so the question we're going to have a go at then, like last week, is question 5, and it's the one where you have to summarize the text in your own words. So both texts need to be used, and they will talk to you, they will ask you a question about a specific theme. So you need to make sure that you summarize 2 ideas per text because it's worth 4 marks. This is one of the only questions where you don't need to quote the text. If you do, it's not a problem, but you don't need to, so it might save you a bit of time. And the information that you talk about, it might be similar or different across the 2 texts. Now, if you remember from last week, we looked at this question. It asked you to briefly explain in your own words what the writers thought of Blackpool and Verona. Hopefully you did that lesson and you'll remember. And this was the exemplar I gave you. In the Dickens text, he really liked walking through Verona. He thought it had a beautiful theatre and he'd always remember it fondly. I said you only needed 2 and I'd done 3 points in that one. And then in the Bryson text, he didn't enjoy being in Blackpool because he thought it was dirty and he was really disappointed by the attractions, namely the illuminations, and he also just couldn't understand its appeal. So that is an example of how you answer this question. You don't need to quote, it's completely in my own words, and I'm just summarising how each writer thought of each place. The question we're going to answer now is this one. Using information from both texts, briefly explain in your own words the treatment of children in prison. Now, my advice to you would be to start like this in Wilde's text, and you give us two ways in your own words how children are treated in prison, and then you do the same for Johnson's. In your own words, 2 ways you think children are treated in prison. Now, if you have completed the 2 tasks I just asked you to do, you should already have the answers for this question here and here. You just need to put them in full sentences. Okay, so pause the video now for a couple of minutes. Write your answers, please. Remember, 2 for each one is ideal because it's worth 4 marks. And then join me when you are done. Okay, hopefully we've had a go at that. Well done, everybody. I'm going to show you an exemplar answer. This is the one that I wrote. Remember, yours might not be exactly the same. We might have picked different stuff. It depends what you put in your bullet points to prepare. In Wilde's text, the treatment of children is inhumane as they can be confined to cells for 23 of the 24 hours. He also says they're punished and ordered about by the staff who work there. So 2 examples there of how they're treated. They're confined to cells and they're ordered about and punished by the staff that work there. Similarly, because I think both these two authors have similar ideas. In Johnson's text, the treatment of children is unfair because they can be mistreated by staff and inmates too. He also says they have limited access to their loved ones and their possessions. So 2 ways there that they're treated. They're also mistreated by staff, like Oscar Wilde says they are, and they have limited access to their positions and their loved ones, so they can't see their friends or family very often. Okay, and that's as simple as question 5 needs to be. You're asked to summarise on a specific theme, so just make sure you read the question carefully. In this one, it was the treatment of children in prison. 2 ideas per text. You don't need to quote the text, remember, so try and keep it in your own words. And what you're talking about might be similar or different for each author across the 2 texts. Okay. If you have any questions about that, you're struggling, you're not sure, pop on the Google Meet. Your tutors are there to help you if you need help from them. If not, well done, we're all good. Let's move on to our final question, question 6. So again, we practiced this question last week. This is the one where we have to compare the views of the writers. This is a 10 marker. You answer this one the way that you would answer all the other inference questions, with a point backed up by a quote, a point backed up by a quote. And again, our target, we're going to go for 8 points in total. Because we're doing a comparison, we're going to split that up and do 4 points per text. And again, the information that you give might be similar. So it might be similarly, or it might be different. On the other hand, or whereas, last week they were very different, the author's views to Blackpool and Verona. This week they seem to be very similar on how children are treated in prison. For this question, we do need to quote, remember, and if you can embed your quotes into your sentences, that's even better, because you'll save time because you're not writing "this is shown in the quote," and also it'll make your sentences sound more fluent. You do need to make sure, though, you're making it clear which text you're talking about, and everybody I looked at last week did this really well. Everybody started each sentence with Dickens, or with Bryson. So make sure you do that this week as well, Johnson and Wilde. It's always a good idea to use the surname of the writers and not their first names. Remember, if you feel confident in doing so in this question, you can comment on language, you can comment on the format. We've got a newspaper article and a letter today. You can comment on the structure, you can comment on the tone, anything you want basically, because when you look at the bullet points for this question, you have a how the writers get across their attitudes. So that might be where you talk about language if you want to. So here's the question. Both of these texts are about children in prison. Compare the writer's attitudes towards the prison system for children and how the writers get their attitudes across to the readers. 10 marks. Okay, so make sure you are looking at that all the time. The question, you're comparing how the writers feel about the prison system. Okay, what do they think of that system? Now, as always, I'm going to start you off with 2 examples, and if you want to use them to get you started, that's absolutely fine. Both writers have the same negative attitude towards the prison system. Wilde's attitude is that the prison system is one of cruelty. That's my first point, as he refers to the brutality of the system. And I've got a quote there to back it up. Something's brutal, it's cruel, isn't it? It's harsh. Johnson also believes the system's cruel, as he says children suffer torturous loneliness, abuse from staff and other inmates. I don't think I need to explain that quote anymore. I think it's quite clear that torturous loneliness and abuse backs up my point that it's cruel. So my point or my inference is always underlined and my quotes are always in red, as you've probably noticed. You don't need to do this. I just do that so you can tell the difference between the 2. So you've got 2 to start you off there if you want to use them, but the target as always is 8 different points supported by 8 different quotes. I would try and do 4 points, from the first text and 4 points from the second text, and I would alternate them. So I would start with Wilde or Johnson, it doesn't matter, but if you start with Wilde, then make a point about Johnson, then go back to Wilde, then go back to Johnson. So alternate like that. Last week I told you that was a good exam technique because you can only score so many marks if you talk about both the texts. If you only talk about one text, so say you make 6 points about only one text, I think they limit your mark at 4. Doesn't matter how many brilliant points you make because you've already only talked about one text. So you need to make sure you're talking about both. So if you alternate them, even if you do run out of time, you'll always get the full marks because you've discussed both texts. Okay, so now's the time where we need to pause the video. I would give yourself 20 minutes only. Refer back to both of your texts. Remember, if you need to, I've seen quite a few people do this, just highlight in your texts the bits that the quotes that you want to use. You could do that really quickly straight away and then go through them and start writing them up. You just need to highlight it and press that highlight colour tool there. Remember, we need to be making a range of different points and we can use the entirety of both texts for these. So take some stuff from the beginning, the middle and the end and make sure you are focused on that question. It's the writer's attitude, so how they feel about the prison system. Okay, so pause the video, give yourself 20 minutes and join me then and we'll go through some exemplar answers. All right, well done everybody. Hopefully you've made as many points as you can in that time. We're expecting around this point for you to be making at least 5 different points of your own. 6 would be amazing, 3 from each text. I appreciate when you're on a computer, it's a little bit time consuming, flicking between tabs and highlighting and whatnot. But if you do have the facilities to print things off at home, please do so, probably make it a bit easier for you. And if you are typing on paper, you just need to take a picture of what you've done at the end and turn it in. So let's go through some of the things that you could have said. Remember, these are not absolutely right. These are just things that I picked out. You probably have different quotes to me. If you have the exact same quotes as me for every single point, that's going to make me a little bit suspicious that you've just spun onto this slide and paused it and copied the answers. Remember, there's absolutely no point in doing that because it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't show us what you're good at, does it? Just shows you what I'm good at. All right, let's go. So both writers believe the system is damaging children. As Wilde says, it does not understand the psychology of a child's nature because they are punished and ordered about. Okay, so Wilde thinks they're being damaged. Yeah. Similarly, Johnson also says children are seriously stressed and resorting to drug use to cope and to alleviate stress, grief, and anger. So both of them believe here that the system is damaging children. One, because they're stressed out and they're resorting to drugs. The other, because they don't understand how a child's mind works. Therefore, punishing them and ordering them about is presumably making them stressed and scared as well. Next one. Wilde also says the cruelty of the system is hidden because it is unbelievable except to those who have witnessed it. So it's got to be seen to be believed, basically. Johnson draws on his first-hand experience to say that the prison system is a huge waste of money that doesn't work because it fails to rehabilitate, which means it never gets to the root of the problem. Like Johnson, Wilde uses his first-hand experience to show the cruelty of the prison system, describing seeing a child whose face was like a white wedge of sheer terror who had eyes of a hunted animal. Quite a harrowing description, that, isn't it, of that poor child that he was describing there. And Johnson also believes that children don't believe that system works. because 3/4 of them said they didn't trust any professional involved in their so-called care. Okay, next up. Finally, both writers want the system to change while believing that conditions should improve and a resolution of the House of Commons is needed. Hopefully you can see how I'm embedding my quotes into the sentences here. Yeah, and I'm not just saying this is shown in the quote. And Johnson also wants the same thing. He wants it to change as well. He says the government needs to understand the links between trauma and child offending and properly funded support instead. Now, as I said, there are loads and loads of different things you could have picked out of this. So you shouldn't have the same quotes as me at all. You should have gone for different things. It would probably be a massive coincidence if we both had the same, okay? What these exemplar answers are for, and I say this every week, they're for you to do this next task, which is the self-assessment one, the one that people keep skipping and I keep telling you not to. I want you to check that you have compared the writer's viewpoints in each text. And the way that you could do that is you can look at my examples and you can, get an idea of what you could have been saying and think, okay, am I similar to that? Am I on the right track, or have I got completely the wrong end of the stick? So they're here to help you, okay? They're not there for you to copy. Have you embedded quotes from the text to support each point that you've made? So something very easy you can check for, make sure you've got a quote every time. Have you tracked from the beginning to the end of each text? And have you tried to make a range of different points? So your target was 8 in total. If you've made 3 for each text, that's brilliant. If you've only made 1 for each text or 2 for each text, obviously timing is an issue for you. So when you get to the give yourself some feedback, what have you mastered and what do you need to develop? In that development one, it needs to be your timing. Okay, so you need to practice going through texts, highlighting and picking out what you need in the time frame. Now, there's some more ideas for feedback there in that box as usual. These are the most common ones: making quotes shorter, making sure you embed them, tracking through, making more points we've already discussed as a timing issue, and making sure you're focused on the question and you're not going off on a tangent. All right, so please pause the video now, take 5 minutes, read back through your answers, maybe compare them to mine, and I want you to write your self-assessment, please. You will find this here. So you should have written your responses to question 6 there, and underneath it will be self-assessment. What went well for you today, and what do you think you still need to develop? Pause the video now, please, and do that task for me. Okay, well done, everyone, for your hard work today. Hopefully you've reflected a little bit there, so you've got a good idea. If you're writing the same things every week, perhaps that you need some more one-to-one tuition. Maybe you need to stay on the meets instead of working independently, and maybe work with one of your tutors. If you think that what you need to develop is becoming what you've now mastered, that's excellent, because that means you are meeting the targets that you're setting for yourself. All right, the last thing that I'm going to get you to do, sorry, I'll quickly recap question 6. So remember, question 6 is where you compare the writer's views in each text. Those views might be similar or different. Today, they were very similar. Last week, they were very different. You need to make sure that you embed quotes from both texts in this question. And you also need to make sure you make clear which text you're talking about, which we all actually did quite well last week. Remember, if you feel confident in doing so, you can comment on the language or the format or anything you want, but it's not necessary to spot features or anything like that of language in this question. All right, so we were practicing question 5 and question 6. Question 5 was summarising, question 6 was the comparison, and as always, embedding quotes to support ideas. But remember, only for question 6, when you summarise for that question, quotes are not mandatory. You won't lose any marks if you don't quote for question 5. All right, last thing I'd like you to do, please, similar to last week, can you choose a number between 1 and 6? If last week you chose number 2, and you already did the compare how question 6 is different to question 5, choose a different number today, choose number 4 or choose number 5. If you chose number 1, can you describe how to answer question 5? If you chose number 2, you're comparing how question 6 is different to question 5. There were actually some good responses to that one last week, the people that did it. If you choose number 3, I want you to summarise how to answer question 6 to someone else. Number 4, list 2 things you feel confident doing in question 6. You might want to look at your self-assessment for that one. If you chose number 5, what don't you need to do in question 5? And finally, if you chose number 6, I want you to explain 1 thing you maybe still don't understand about question 5 or question 6. So pause the video for the last time, please, couple of minutes, choose a number from 1 to 6, and then complete the task, complete the instruction next to it. Okay, everyone, well done. Thank you very much for your hard work. What you need to do now is you need to make sure you go back to Google Classroom, to your assignment, and you need to turn in your work. So remember, on Classroom, look, yours will look a little bit different to mine, but you need to find wherever that turn it in button is. Usually it's a big blue or purple button where your documents will be above it. If you've used any additional Google documents, you need to make sure you upload them as well, or if you've taken pictures, you need to upload them too, and then make sure you turn it in. Your tutors then will give you some feedback. Please make sure you read it, and we will see you next week. All right, thanks very much.